Good evening, folks. We're going to get started. I hope everybody got to have a little bit of food. Feel free to go back and help yourself to some snacks. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you to folks who are online. And thank you especially to our panelists who had some homework to prepare for this session where we'll be looking at a really important report that came out of the UN earlier this month that we want you and other folks in Pittsburgh and elsewhere to know about and to start using in our work to bring about change in our communities. My name is Jackie Smith. I'm with the Human Rights City Alliance here in Pittsburgh, and we also are part of a national network of cities working to bring human rights home and use UN norms and laws and reports like this to help our own political leaders know what human rights are and what human rights we expect, and know what rights we can expect as members of a global community that believes that human rights don't have borders and that everyone is entitled to all the rights that they need to live full, healthy, and vibrant lives. And that means that we have to change a lot of things that are happening in our cities, in our communities, in our laws. And so it's time for all of us to roll up our sleeves and be the human rights enforcers. So this work is part of human rights enforcement, and we're commissioning all of you to be part of this enforcement team. We got to guard the guardians. The law enforcement doesn't respect human rights. We got to make them. That's our job. And that's what our movements is teaching us over time. We're learning that we can't leave it up to governments. So we do want to thank, there are a couple of elected officials who came tonight. We want to thank them for their service and recognize that all of us should be thinking about being leaders in our community in many different ways, but including running for office. And Bethany Holland running for city county council. Serving in the magistrate. So he's one of the people that has to know about what we're talking about tonight. There's others in our community. We will be sharing this report with other folks in city leadership and county leadership that need to know what the UN is telling the US government and them, local and county government, what should be done to improve human rights protections for all people. And this report in particular focuses on people of African descent and the experiences of people of African descent who are face particular kinds of discrimination. So this expert mechanism on law enforcement and racial justice, otherwise known as EMLR, was charged with coming to the United States and looking globally at this problem, but it came to the United States to think about how are people of African descent treated in law enforcement in the United States, what changes need to be made to make our regulations in this country more consistent with what global expectations are. So this is what the report's about, but we know that the US government isn't going to do anything unless they hear from us. And we know that a lot of the changes have to be made here in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and in our courts. And so it's up to us to make sure that those folks in the leadership know about the report and know what it means. And as you'll see, the report really calls for wide-ranging changes. And I'll just list a few of the things that we think is really important from this report, which really echoes a lot of the things that folks in the Black Lives Matter movement are saying about what kinds of changes need to happen. So to have UN experts and authorities in international human rights law say the same thing that our movements are demanding gives us another tool, another hammer that we can use to push forward the kinds of changes we know we want. So in the report, what's super interesting to think about is they make very clear that the problem is not about individual police officers and even training of police officers. It's a much bigger problem, and we have to tackle systemic racism. Another thing that they keep pointing out several times in the report is that we need to engage in truth-telling about the history of racism and racial discrimination in the United States, including the history of slavery, Jim Crow, and all the factors that mean that people of African descent are facing particular challenges. And this is great at a time when political leaders here are denying the importance of teaching that real history, the truth telling. So this is a tool we can use to push forward change. Finally, it calls for a national coordination of policing policy. Every police jurisdiction kind of writes its own rules, and there's no national body that helps make sure that there's consistency in how people's rights are protected. The international community expects that national coordination. That's what a country is about. It should have laws and rights of residents should be protected, whether you're in Mississippi, Alabama, Illinois, Pennsylvania. So we need that national coordination, and the UN is backing us up. And finally, I think what's really exciting is the language that they give around calling for a human rights-based approach to policing, so that police officers understand their role is protecting our rights, not being concerned about their safety first, and treating the community as adversaries, which is often what happens. So I'm going to stop here and just say that our group, the Human Rights City Alliance, is working with our partners to make sure that the message in the report gets to our political leaders. We encourage you to help us on that. If you sign up, we'll keep you posted on ways you can get involved and things you can do and tell you what we're doing. But this panel tonight will be helping us shape that message that we send to City Council, to the Mayor's Office, to County Council, County Executive, Jail Oversight Board. So all those folks that need to see this, the police chief, they will hear this message. And so our discussion can help shape that. So without further ado, I want to introduce one of our student leaders who's been part of this process of providing. We did some work back in the winter. Some of you know we submitted a report on conditions in Pittsburgh that helped shape and inform the report that came out of the UN earlier this month. So we were part of a global conversation about what's happening in different parts of the country. So what happened here is reflected, I think, in some of the report. But Essie Ayasu and members of Casa, the Center for Analytical Approaches to Social Innovation, helped us pull together our report and some of this other work we have to do of making sure people know about the report and know about the UN report. Because that stuff doesn't just happen just because a report gets issued, people don't read it. So we want you to read it. We want to make it available. There's a few copies around. There's links on our website and in the mailing. So please check out the report. But we're going to highlight some of the things that folks here who are doing this work in Pittsburgh think are really key to know, to take away from this important document. So Essie's going to lead us through the panel, and we've crafted some questions for the panelists, and looking forward to hearing their thoughts.
Well, before we get started, I just want to say, our magisterial district judge over here, Nick Martini, he's doing an expungement clinic, and there's flyers for it. It's on November 1st, and so before you go away, you can get a flyer, or we can give you more. Oh, thank you. Okay, carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie, and everybody at Human Rights City Alliance, and thank you all for coming. So I'm going to start by introducing the panelists, and then we will move on to the first round of questions directed at all the panelists. And we have 3 rounds of questions, and we are really looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts on the report and what your organization is doing. So this is Brandi Fisher with Alliance for Police Accountability. Laura Perkins with Casa San Jose, Tanisha Long with Abolitionist Law Center, and Manny, who is the Advocacy and Policy Engagement Coordinator at One Human Media. So I will start with the first question directed at all of you. Brandi, if you want to start, or Manny, if you want to start this side, doesn't matter. So please tell us about your organization's work, particularly in regard to the issue of racial justice in law enforcement. And if you have any quotes or anything that you took from the recommendation section of the UN report and how it relates to your work and how it speaks to the issue of racial justice in law enforcement.
I'm honored to speak first. No, I'm just joking. So yeah, so I'm going to read just a little bit, but I'm not going to stick to the script completely. One Hood Media is a collective of socially conscious artists and activists who utilize art to raise awareness about social justice issues. I actually like to describe One Hood as like similar to the group Wu-Tang. I don't know if y'all familiar with Wu-Tang, because everybody who's like a One Hood staff member kind of like has their own thing. You know what I'm saying? So like there are 5 pillars of One Hood. I'm gonna make sure I get this right. It's arts and culture, it's media, education, activism, civic engagement. Right? So like I'm personally on the civic engagement side. And everybody who is a part of One Hood is like in their own rights, doing like their own thing. You know what I'm saying? We come together under this umbrella. You know what I mean? Really, the concept of One Hood is solidarity and unity across organizations and across neighborhoods, really across the country. You know what I'm saying? Culturally, we do what we call cultural organizing. And that's what we do. And I personally focus my work on the criminal legal system, and it's because of my own personal history. I've been directly impacted by the criminal legal system. One of my earliest memories, believe it or not, was in the courtroom when I was a toddler, watching my brother get sentenced to 10 to 20, you know what I'm saying, of which he did 18, you know what I mean? And so a lot of the members of our community that One Hood primarily represents, which are poor Black and brown communities, you know what I'm saying, are unfortunately engulfed in the criminal legal system. And so I focus a lot of my work on that, and I'll get a little bit more in detail about what we do in that respect. But as far as, you know, about law enforcement, I wrote this down, so I'll make sure I say it. Contact with law enforcement, I believe, is a direct entryway to the criminal legal system, which I personally focus a lot of my work on. So I think it's important to think about how law enforcement is engaging with our community, because a lot of these people are having long-lasting, sometimes lifelong effects of the criminal legal system, you know what I'm saying, because of these initial contacts. We ran into a guy yesterday at the table, somebody I knew like for a very long time. He actually just got out of prison about a month ago, right? And the reason he got out of prison because he kept violating parole. They kept sending him back for an initial charge that he caught in like 2005. And the reason I know that is because he was my co-defendant. We caught the charge together. You know what I'm saying? So like him, like the recidivism is related to probation, parole, violations. You know what I'm saying? We can get more into that. But that all stems from that initial contact with law enforcement. And if you have a law enforcement which is biased, which is over-policing, you know what I'm saying, which is, you know, of course, overcharging, then there's going to be this over-representation of poor Black and brown people in the criminal legal system, which is how you get to where you are today. And so One Hood, we do a whole lot. I suggest y'all Google us if you're not familiar with us. We're not going to get into everything. But I focus my work primarily on the criminal legal system.
So I'm Tanisha with the Abolitionist Law Center. Abolitionist Law Center is a social justice litigation firm. So we ride this really cool wave where we're half social justice organizers and half lawyers. I am not a lawyer. I tell people that all the time, not a lawyer. But the cool thing about the Abolitionist Law Center is we are abolitionists. We do a lot of decarceral work. We work to free people from the conditions of their confinement. We put up lawsuits against the police. Every individual I work with holds the type of commitment and values that are centered around liberation. And a lot of this liberatory work that we do is informed by our own experiences, our own traumas, our own interactions with people who have been in those situations. Our founder, Salim, was what was considered a juvenile lifer, sentenced for something called felony murder, which means he didn't commit a murder, he was there when a murder was committed. And he was sentenced as a teenager to life without parole in prison. And thankfully, we had some laws that changed, which made it so that he was able to get out and help found the Abolitionist Law Center. But when we're talking about this report, you know, there's a part of the report where they talk about, you know, policing isn't just down to a few bad apples. And they're correct. It's because you can't carve rot out of fruit. You never know how far it's spread. And a lot of what we do is strategic litigation. We want to attack it from every root, every spore, every pore. We want to make sure that we're finding those loopholes and closing them. So our work involves, bringing forth the type of cases that may not change a law, but change the way it's interpreted in such a way it can quit being so harmful. So we sue the jail all the time. We sue the county all the time. I love a good lawsuit. They're like, Tanisha, do you want to be a plaintiff? I'm like, I would love that. So, technically suing Bethany, I don't know. But, it's okay, I'm sorry. But she's great. Disclaimer. Those are the type of things we do because we understand that, activism takes many different forms. And our lane is in community organizing and in litigation.
Hey everyone, my name is Laura Perkins. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a human rights organizer at Casa San Jose. Casa San Jose connects, supports, and advocates with and for the Latino community of Southwest Pennsylvania. Our vision is Southwest Pennsylvania that embraces all cultures and creates a safe environment for everyone. So more specifically, the work that we do around this topic is creating spaces that are more accessible for our community. There are many reasons why our community don't have access. I myself was born here. I'm not Latina, and so like in the future, hopefully we can get one of our community members up here. But there are a lot of barriers to that. I'm not criticizing this panel at all, but there are reasons why it's easier for me to be here than other folks. So that's an example of the work that we do around that. But our community specifically, the community we work with specifically faces a lot of barriers. One logistical barrier in terms of data is that in the census and nationally, Latino is an ethnicity and not a race. And as a result, our community is left out of a lot of the data, which seems like silly, but it means that, it means that a lot of like the reports and everything might not, depending on how you do the search. So for example, in the Allegheny County courts, our community doesn't exist because it's an ethnicity, which is not a required field. Anyway, so our community faces a lot of barriers, our community being primarily undocumented. Sorry, I didn't say that, but there you go.
Are you apologizing?
I'm so sorry.
You're forgiven.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brandi Fisher. The Alliance for Police Accountability is an organization focused on reconstructing the criminal legal system. The purpose, people always say, what does that mean, reconstruction, right? And usually you think about the Reconstruction era. So yes, it was intentional. But, the point is that, you have to really tear a system down and rebuild it, opposed to trying to change it similar to what Tanisha was saying about bad apples. It's the same with the entire system. We're a collective of voices of different organizations. We're not just like one body. We're about 25 organizations that come together to work on these issues together. Our 3 pillars is advocacy. We advocate hard for individuals who are victims of injustice of any kind when it comes to the criminal legal system, because there's all kind of intersections with the criminal legal system. So you have children in school getting arrested for fighting, opposed to being suspended, and parents have no idea what to do, how to find a lawyer, or how to advocate. And so there's a lot of policy change that need to happen in the school discipline policies because they're directly connected to the criminal legal system. They even use the word suspect instead of students in a lot of policies that we've been comparing over the past month. And also we try to educate the community. So each time that we get an individual case, we figure out, like, when you lose a lot, you want to know why you keep losing, right? And often it's the law. It's the way the law is written. They use the law to justify bias because it's systemic and it's embedded in our system and the laws. So we try to educate our community on what these laws or what the policies that are happening, because who has time to attend every city or county council meeting, right? Who has time to follow what's happening in Harrisburg? I barely have the time. And actually, who has the interest, right? Even though it does impact our everyday life, everybody doesn't have that interest. And so it's the job of community organizations to kind of do some of that legwork to help people navigate the system. Lastly, we focus on policy changes, whether it's ballots at the referendum, whether it's policies in school, or whether it's policies in our legislative bodies, and policies governing our police department specifically. And so, those are our 3 pillars, long story short. We also focus on our root causes. One thing we always say about organization is that we're needs-based. We don't sit back and think about where's the funding? What is the best program that we can create? It's really in response to what the community is saying that they're being, that they're facing, with the calls that we're receiving, and is how do we respond to this in a holistic manner.
Oh, my favorite quote. I'm sorry. I did get a quote.
I did have a quote, that's why I was up here on my phone. I have a report. If I don't say it, Jackie will kill me. Okay. It was about systemic racism. And it says, systemic racism against Africans and people of African descent exists in the United States, and is a legacy of slavery and the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. The end of this heinous market and the abolition of slavery 150 years ago by the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution did not in itself delete the racially discriminatory structures created by those practices. Those structures of racism, racial discrimination, inequalities, marginalization, exclusion, and subordination, although to a lesser extent, are still felt to this day. The reason why I picked that quote is because often people point to the Constitution as a guide, right? And, you know, there is a lot of problems still with our Constitution, and it needs change in itself. So that's why I picked that quote.
All right, thank you all. Everybody here has pointed out some really clear ways to move forward and what the future can look like. To us, it seems pretty clear, but I guess from how the world is functioning right now, that is not the case. So I really just appreciate all of you giving some guidance to what the future can look like if we made the internal changes, if we made the changes to the governing system through policy. So for the second round of questions, I'd like to move on to more tailored questions to each organization. And this will be a bit longer, so you have about 5 to 7 or so minutes. So please take your time, and I'm happy to reread the questions as we go as well. So first question, I'll hand over to Manny, which is that the UN report expert mechanism made some deliberate efforts to include the voices of people who've had direct experience with the U.S. Criminal legal system. And they included in their report the names of the 133 people providing testimony during the U.S. visit in May. How do you think these voices have influenced the report? And what recommendations do you think will be most important or helpful to victims and others who are directly impacted by racism in law enforcement?
So, yeah, I personally think that unless you're talking to people who are directly impacted by the system, you don't really know what's going on in it. So I'm gonna go back to, you know, the jail yesterday when we went into my old code D. There was a woman who approached us and was telling us about her experience in the ACJ. And I was urging her to come to the jail oversight board meeting. It's the first Thursday of every month, 4 p.m. in the Gold Room at the county courthouse. So I'm urging you all to attend to. But what I said to her was, like, if you don't show up and tell your story, you know what I'm saying, the jail officials would tell like a different version of what's actually happened inside. You know what I mean? And to them, everything's peachy keen, everything's fine. There are no roaches, there are no rats. But this woman yesterday is telling me that like they don't eat off the tray because, you know what I'm saying, there's roaches and rat feces on the trays themselves. You know what I'm saying? If we're not telling our side of the story, then you're not getting the full picture. You know what I mean? So I don't really think you have any validity or peace. Everybody say peace to America. She's such an important person. I gotta stop my family and knowledge. So she is our director of policy. And thank you for coming. I appreciate you. You got it. So, oh yeah, so.
Forgot what you were saying.
Shit on the trays. So they know what you're talking about, not the audience.
No. So yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely important. You don't really have a valid report, and you don't really have like a clear story if you only have one side, especially if you're relying on people who are the perpetuators of this system of oppression in order to tell you about what's going on in the system. You know what I mean? Especially like the negative aspects of it. You know, I'm personally an abolitionist. I don't believe you can reform the system. I do believe it's operating and functioning the way that it was designed to. You know what I'm saying? Depending on how far back you want to go, you can trace policing back to slave patrols. You know what I mean? And you can trace really our current legal system and mass incarceration to what do you call it? Like, of course, like white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? But a result of, you know what I'm saying, the slave trade. You know what I mean? There was a fancy word I can't recall at the moment, but anyway, so this is extremely important for us to be at the table, and that's why I appreciate being here myself. I think probably my main value that I bring to the table is my own experience. You know what I'm saying? Not just in the ACJ, but with the court system. You know what I mean? And that's another aspect of it. I know we're talking about policing, you know what I'm saying, but these decisions that are made in the courts have like a longer impact on people's lives. You know what I'm saying? So there's a reason that 95% of the people in the ACJ are not serving a sentence. You know what I mean? It's because so many people who are there already got sentenced to probation. So anything that they're accused of while they're on probation, there's no amount of money that can get them out. It doesn't matter whether or not they're actually guilty. You know what I'm saying? In fact, this whole system itself, it doesn't really matter if you're guilty or not. You don't really even have an opportunity to prove your innocence until, you know what I'm saying, far down, so far down the road, you know what I mean? And that's something that I didn't even realize or understand until I went through it myself, you know what I mean? And if it wasn't for people like me, maybe you wouldn't understand it either. I actually did an interview with somebody that told me that I was the first person they talked to that they knew who had been in jail. And that was mind blowing to me because everybody in my community, everybody in my family, that was just a part of what I've grown up experienced. That was a part of the conditioning, I would say, as like 4 black young men. I have 4 older brothers, we all been in jail, you know what I'm saying, 3 of us been in prison, you know what I mean? And that was just a part of our experience. But unless you come from that environment, that experience is something that's unfamiliar to you. You know what I mean? The school to prison pipeline may be unfamiliar to you. You know, I mean, police brutality may be unfamiliar to you. So unless you have people who are, you know, vocal about their experiences and telling their stories, then you don't have, like I said, a clear picture of what's actually happening. You know what I mean? So I appreciate being here. Yeah, I think so. Oh, what recommendations do you think? You know what? I actually took some notes. So 136. Paragraph 136. It talks about adopting a national strategy to reduce the maximum possible number of killings by law enforcement. Gradually withdraw all armed officers from routine traffic enforcement and remove their authority to stop cars only for minor traffic violations. Instead, consider putting in place civilian traffic response units. So, in other words, instead of having police officers who are stopping people from minor traffic, you know what I'm saying, infringements, have people who are not police officers, have civilians, you know what I'm saying, who are enforcing these traffic laws, who are like, which are like very small, you know, we call them like summary offenses at best, which are like very small, you know, offenses. But instead, a lot of times that's the entryway, you know what I'm saying, in order for them to, you know, potentially prosecute you. Another one I'll say, 150, paragraph 150, protect all children below 18 years from the adult criminal legal system. We have juveniles who are currently in our Allegheny County jail, you know what I'm saying? And that was my own personal experience. My first time in the county jail, I was a juvenile. And it's no place, I believe, for human beings, period, especially the ACJ being the deadliest jail in the state, one of the deadliest per capita in the country, you know what I'm saying? It's no place, especially for children. And 139, remove police presence in schools and implement alternatives, including investing in sufficient qualified personnel, such as counselors, social workers, nurses, mental health professionals. And I was actually explaining this to somebody earlier today. They were talking about possibly reopening Schumann. And I said, instead of investing in punitive measures, I'm saying, why don't you like reinvest in them to prevent them from being in that position in the first place? You know what I'm saying? Why not invest in education? Why not invest in you know, community-led organizations or even like community centers? You know? So, and this is the last thing I'll say. school to prison pipeline is a real thing, and our children, especially young Black children, are being conditioned at a very young age to accept the authority of the state so that they do not challenge it whenever they get older. I'm saying I think that's something that needs to be challenged.
Once you guys have access to the UN report, I really recommend looking over some of the recommendations you have mentioned. I think they are really, really crucial and are worth looking over outside of this session as well. So thank you. All right, I'll move on to Tanisha with Abolitionist Law Center. So ALC has long been working on several key problems the UN report discusses, including the discriminatory effects of cash bail, death by incarceration, racial profiling, and traffic stops. Can you discuss how the mechanisms report might impact the ongoing efforts at your center to bring about changes in these harmful practices?
So the first thing I'll say is that most people are not aware how close they are to incarceration, how very easy it is to end up in a county jail, and how very hard it is to get out. Depending how well you know me, you're either very surprised or super unsurprised to know that I've been to jail twice. Just depends how well you know me. But when I say you're super close to incarceration, people don't know they have warrants out. People don't know that, an unpaid traffic ticket leads to the suspension of their license. I was suspended for 12 years, and after year 1, I'm like, well, we're driving. And then I ended up in jail. But it's neither here nor there. A lot of people don't realize that when we talk about things like cash bail, that creates a system wherein you can either afford to commit crime or you can't afford to commit crime. It creates a class-based system. And it's also a race-based system because we know there are links between income and race. And when we look at the demographics of the Allegheny County Jail and we see how disproportionately Black it is, we realize that this is on purpose. When we look at the race of the kids in the Allegheny County Jail and see that at any given time it's between 90 and 100% Black, we recognize that they're trying to get us at our youth. When we talk about the work that ALC does, like I said, I love a good lawsuit. We sue to change practices, we sue to change policies through litigation. We have a lawsuit surrounding probation detainers. A huge amount of our people are in jail for tiny things. A probation violation leads to a jail detention. My mom's technically incarcerated right now for drinking a beer and has been for, how long have we been going at this? For like 2.5, almost 3 years. She hasn't even gotten resentenced yet. And she's just hanging out there. She's being punished for her mental health. She's being punished for her alcoholism. And these are the type of things we see every day. So when we have reports like the UN's report, I think the best thing it can do is illuminate some of these issues for people who are unaware. And that means we also have to get it out there. So a lot of people are not online going, what is the newest UN report? I'm really curious as to what they're getting down with. We don't. So we have a responsibility to share stories with our friends. A lot of the work at the Abolitionist Law Center is two-pronged. Yes, we do the litigation, and we're good at it. But also where I fit in is that community work. We can connect communities. We get people's stories out there. If you Google the Allegheny County Jail prior to 2020, the news coverage on there, I'm not gonna say non-existent, but barely existent. You Google it now, you know when somebody dies. You know when Bethany's going off of the JOB. You know when we're suing the jail. And that's the type of awareness that we can only create by centering the stories of people who are in there. These people who are incarcerated now have faces and names. I'm not gonna lie, I almost cried yesterday when I found out one of my favorite clients was getting out, when we thought we weren't gonna see him for decades. And when we put a face behind these issues, we put a name behind these issues, then I don't want to use the term humanizing because they were always humans. We make other people aware of their humanity in ways that they may not have been willing to be. So with us, these reports do help when it comes to litigation, only because people are more aware of the issues. But the real impact comes when you make your friends and family aware of this. There were some great suggestions in there strategic litigation, judicial accountability. We filed 70+ complaints against Judge Mariani, and we just now got a response yesterday from the Judicial Conduct Board. And it was a very short letter, and it said, "We are closing the complaints. We issued him a warning." Yeah, when you get a warning, that changes things for me. I've been warned so many times, I'm like, I'm never gonna do that again. And I'm sure that's the approach Judge Mariani is gonna take. And things we were complaining about were racism in sentencing, racism in probation detainers, racism in his willingness to accept a plea deal, the way he spoke to the mother of someone who ended up dying in the jail 2 weeks later, telling him that, even though you beat your case, I'm gonna hold you on a probation detainer while I find a reason to send you upstate, because I believe you're a danger to your community. Even though his behavior and actions did not prove him to be a danger to his community, he died in the jail because he was placed in a place that was far more dangerous than his community. And these are the type of things we have to highlight. These are the type of things we have to hold people accountable for. So I enjoyed those parts of the report where they said, judicial accountability, strategic litigation. Then there's parts in the report where they say things like police training. You can't train humanity into people. It doesn't work like that. So we have a responsibility to kind of take up the mantle on these things, even though it shouldn't be our responsibility. Oppressed people are always asked to teach their oppressors how not to oppress them. And it's not fair. Because usually those oppressed people are Black people, brown people, Jewish people, people of all faiths, who are then asked to answer, how can police stop killing me? When the answer to ending police brutality is for police to stop engaging in police brutality. The answer to judges to stop doing discriminatory sentencing is for judges to stop doing discriminatory sentencing. But we have to come up with the solutions, and it's not fair. But unfortunately, to get radical change, we become so good at it that they expect us to do the work. So we're stuck here.
Thank you, Tanisha. I think something that you pointed out about the mechanism sort of solidifying the on-the-ground feelings about these issues that's something I also took out of their writing and just reading the report was how, yes, like what you feel is really like that's true, that's how you're feeling, and these are changes that have to be made now. So I really appreciate you highlighting and pointing that out as well to the group here. Okay, I'm gonna move on to Laura. So the annual report's discussion of detention centers focuses on people of African descent. And I thought maybe we could hear from you about whether and how the report's recommendations would impact immigrants in the region. I'd also like to, ask how the mechanisms overall recommendations for policing reforms would, if enacted, impact the Latin American immigrants within this area and that you primarily work with. Thank you.
So I'll start with the second part of that question first. So if you look at the recommendations, all of them would benefit the immigrant community. One in particular specifically mentions the immigrant community, which is number 140, adopt an immigration system with a human rights-based approach and address systemic racism within the ranks of immigration authorities. I would echo, I think, what Manny said about how the system itself was built on white supremacy. The first immigration law was the Chinese Exclusion Act. Our immigration law is not meant to be inclusive, it's meant to be exclusive. So I would just, my comment on that would just be that, like what Manny said, it's doing what it's meant to do, the system that we have right now. Besides that, I'd say, again, all of them benefit our community, but I think that a couple of things, if we want to be inclusive of our immigrant community, I would include some more recommendations. One of them, let's add to it. Let's add to it.
We're ready, Laura.
So one of them is language access. A lot of our immigrants, and not just immigrants, don't speak English. And the effects of police officers and courts and jails not providing interpretation when they are legally obligated to provide interpretation. And not just interpretation, which is verbal, but also translation of documents that are so important. It's a violation of Title VI to not do that because they do receive federal funding. So I could talk for hours about the violations of Title VI that happen right within a few blocks of here every single day. So the effect of a police officer not using interpretation starts a process that's very difficult to undo. So I'll give a quick anecdote of, we had an 18-year-old that was having a schizophrenic episode. And first paramedics were called and they, for some reason, decided that this was a police issue. The police came, they did not provide interpretation, and they put our individual in handcuffs. And they said you were under arrest, but they said that in English. And our community member did not understand that he was under arrest, and he was charged with resisting arrest. This extra charge then made him more eligible for immigration detention. And so based on this lack of providing interpretation, it started a whole slew of things. Honestly, it started with the paramedics calling the police. So there are a lot of issues that happened with that case, but all of those issues happen with our community members every day. I once walked by a police officer, Pittsburgh police, and there was a community member with handcuffs, and I asked the police officer, did you provide interpretation? He said, well, no, I don't have anything to say to him. And the community member had handcuffs. So like, you don't have a few things to say. And so I asked the community member, like, do you understand what's going on? He said, no. And so I said, do you have anything to say to the police officer? Yes. And I'm like, there's so many reasons, so many steps in that process where interpretation should have been given, never was. And so we're struggling as Casa San Jose to advocate with police to do the basic thing, and then also with our community members about what's the best way to ask for interpretation when we shouldn't even be having this conversation, right? So like on the back of my business card that says, I do not speak English, I need interpretation, please, but this should not be necessary, right? So language access, I think, should be included. And the second thing is immigration enforcement. It shouldn't just be one line. I think immigration enforcement, when our community members enter the criminal justice system and they enter at higher rates than they are represented in the community, and just a side note, do not rely on the census for accurate data about immigrants. It will never show you the accurate numbers. But when our community members enter into the criminal system, there is a direct line to immigration deportation. And there are no public defenders for immigrants, right? We are fighting a campaign. I'm gonna flag a campaign, Universal Representation, where we are fighting for publicly funded immigration attorneys for every immigrant, but especially those in detention, which should be a basic thing that should be provided to everyone. So again, just recap, I would, first of all of these recommendations are great for our community, but we'd like to add language access and to be more inclusive in our language about immigration enforcement.
Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you. Laura, as a student, I just want to say thank you for kind of giving us an overview of this information. And to me at least, a lot of this is honestly new, so I really appreciate hearing your perspective, reading this report, because I clearly have missed a lot of what you have brought up. So I just appreciate, as a student and as somebody learning still, the things that you have pointed out to us. Okay, I will move on to Brandi. Brandi, so APA and One Hood Media as well recently produced a report called Reimagining Public Safety in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. Many of the recommendations you made resonate with those in the UN expert mechanism, Reimagining Policing, which is the report that is out there available. Can you comment on some of the overlaps you see in the recommendations that your group had been calling for and the message of the UN leaders?
Yeah, I think the main thing was, when I looked at it overall, was this human rights approach to policing. But the way that we talk about that is a public health approach. digging into the humanity of people. And there was, and it was interesting because in the recommendation, they talked about removing punishment for law enforcement from 4 buckets, and the 4 buckets overlap with the same 4 buckets that we chose as well. First, I do want to add on that the Abolitionist Law Center came on as a co-convener for this report as well. We started out with one hood alone, but Tanisha would attack me later if I didn't say that, so. But no, because like she said, they do a lot of litigation, but they also have done a lot of data reports around some of the work that we were doing, and us collectively coming together were able to produce this report. But the 4 buckets were interesting, and I say that because they overlap, but the one overlap is something that I think points to a root cause. And so, one of the buckets was mental health. Another bucket was drug use or abuse. The third bucket was people experiencing homelessness. And the 4th bucket in the report was poverty. And our 4th bucket was violence. And the reason why I say that's very interesting is because our approach and our assessment is that poverty is violent, and that poverty is the root to a lot of the violence that we see, right? And so that was very interesting to us when we saw that, like, okay, in poverty, most of our work is anti-poverty, even though we don't say it, because the people that are targeted by our criminal legal system are mostly people that live in poverty. And that's why they get away with a lot of things, because if you cannot afford an attorney, you almost don't have a chance in a courtroom, no matter what you're charged with. Because they're going to throw a plea at you, they're going to scare you half to death, to make you just, and people who are fearful of this big intimidating system, and may not even understand the system at all, what they're dealing with out of fear, often take pleas, and they probably could win if they had an attorney. And the reason why poverty is also very important is because you heard Mandy say that, him and a lot of his brothers and a lot of people in his community have been arrested. You heard the statistics on the number of people who are Black and brown that are in our local county jail. And some people, misconstrue data. And some people would say that that is because all the crime is being committed by Black and brown people. And the fact of the matter is, and even according to the recent staffing study that came out in the city of Pittsburgh about Pittsburgh police, is that these communities are over-policed, right? They're saturated with policing. And so if you are in a community more often than you're anywhere else, and you're always looking for something, you're going to find it. And sometimes they make it up, right? They see things that just don't exist. And they're stopping people randomly, just from walking up and down the streets. And so, the poverty issue, I think people don't talk about enough, or the intersection of the criminal legal system and poverty, and how that operates and why that's there. And of course, we attach it, we see it in the implications of bail, but before someone is even arrested, right, the fact that they live in a low-income community is the reason why they even have this interaction. And so in those 4 buckets in a Reimagine Public Safety report, what we were doing with Reimagine Public Safety is addressing these issues as public health issues, and it's our way of ending mass incarceration, right? Adding to the end of mass incarceration, because why are these people funneled into the criminal legal system? Why are we arresting people for loitering who are experiencing homelessness downtown on Smithfield Street, right? When they need services, when they need a home, and arresting them is not going to get that. It's really causing more harm. Why are we arresting people who are using drugs, right? Who have a disease, who may have an addiction? Arresting them is not going to get them out of the jail. And actually here locally, going to jail, they may not even get out at all. They may not even make it out alive, right? Because that's what we've been seeing here. And so if we are able to then send people who are experts in these areas, and that's one of the things that the report says, to remove law enforcement from these aspects. And that's what we have been saying, is that instead of having law enforcement respond to these things, if you call 911 right now, there's 3 buckets that you'll get. You'll get EMS, fire, or police. We can easily add a 4th bucket there, right? Where it's the public health line for people who need social workers, for people who need mental health help. And that 911 worker, just like they decide whether that call needs to go to EMS, fire, police, they can decide whether that call needs to go to that fourth bucket. And instead of dispatching law enforcement with people who have mental health issues, often don't make it out of those interactions, right? Because police are trained one way, and that is to respond with force. Anytime somebody resists or they believe somebody is resistant. We can save lives that way. We can also save tax dollars, and we can also end people entering to our criminal legal system and saturating our jail. And I'm going to do a shameless plug because on Monday, this coming Monday on the 30th at the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, we will have a conversation about addressing violence as a public health issue. We went to Newark, New Jersey as a part of this work to visit them because they have a model in which they cut their homicide rate by 50%. And they did this by addressing violence in public health through a public health approach. And so Mayor Ross Baraka and his team will be here with folks who are on the ground here locally addressing violence in our area, having this conversation about what that looks like in practicality.
Can you give us the address, the location, one more time?
Oh, goodness.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's at 6 o'clock. It's from 6 to 9. I don't know the address off the top of my head. I will Google it and make sure I give it to you. But it's the Kelly Strayhorn Theater in East Liberty on Penn Avenue.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to the third and final round of this panel conversation. I do want to just let you all know that we'll move on after that to informal questions. So if you have any questions and thoughts you want to share or ask the panelists, you're welcome to after the third round. All right, so to all panelists, can you recommend some concrete actions people can take to meet the challenges of racial discrimination in law enforcement? And what are the most urgent issues needing our attention right now?
I'm looking forward to this question all day. I'm serious. No. The reason why is because at the end of the day, there are a bunch of people sitting in the room talking. And as we're talking, there are people who are suffering, there are people who are dying. You know what I mean? So I'm not somebody who likes to talk. I actually dislike it, seriously. And the reason I'm here is because of this question. So the most urgent issue, I believe, is the Allegheny County Jail, the state of it. Again, I'm personally an abolitionist, but even as far as jails go, the ACJ is a bad jail. Right? Per capita, we're the deadliest jail in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're one of the deadliest jails in the entire country. You know what I'm saying? And of course, the United States incarcerates people, more people than anywhere else in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like it was mentioned earlier, even if you go into jail, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get out. You know what I mean? I've collaborated quite a few times with Casa through my work with the Bucket Bell Fund. Bucket is named after somebody who died in the jail. You know what I mean? So I come from an aspect of, somebody who has real-life personal experience. The woman that I met yesterday who was talking about her experience, she's talking about permanent physical damage because of the lack of medical care in the jail. So it's not just, being incarcerated. It's not just going through the trauma of that alone. Some people are permanently damaged because of the ACJ and how bad that is specifically. Now, some of the concrete steps that you can take, speaking about the jail, I'll say show up to the jail oversight board meetings. It's the first Thursday of every month, 4 p.m., 1600 hours, at the Gold Room, at the county courthouse. Right? Even if you don't sign up for public comment, just your presence alone, it really does make a difference. Bethany says this all the time. I'm a stereo quote. The jail oversight board meetings used to be like 15 minutes long. I'm serious. And it used to be just, the warden reading a report, everybody going through the motions and everybody going home. Because nobody cared. Same way Tanisha said, we weren't even reporting on the jail, before 2020. Bucket died before 2020. It wasn't even, that big of a deal in the scope of things. Show up to the jail oversight board meeting. If you can't make it, everything is recorded, it's streamed on YouTube. Google it or search it in your YouTube app. And I'll say also One Hood and a group of other folks, we table outside of the jail every Tuesday from 5 to 8. If you're willing or if you're interested, just stop by and like see what's going on from like your own firsthand personal experience. You can get like the stories from people directly who are coming out of the jail. It's every Tuesday from 5 to 8. I'll say donate, you know what I'm saying? And if you cannot show up, if you don't have, if that's not your jam, donate One Hood, Abolitionist Law Center, of course, Casa San Jose, Thomas Merton Center for Food and Environment, there are a lot of good organizations who are directly doing, this work. Get informed, get involved, take the information that you learn here, you know what I'm saying, and share it with somebody who is not here. Again, I told y'all that somebody who interviewed me once said they didn't even know somebody who was incarcerated. Like, but this is something that affects us, you know what I'm saying, in a very deep and very long-lasting and sometimes permanent way. So get informed, get involved, show up, especially to the jail oversight board meetings, and donate if you're able to.
I wrote a list with many stuff. That's a lie, because there's more concrete actions you could be doing. At the Abolitionist Law Center, one of the most effective things we do is court watch. And the reason we do the court watching isn't just because we like to hold judges accountable, but because a lot of things happen in those courtrooms that should not be happening, and that would keep happening if we didn't push back against them. We wouldn't know about how many people were being, held on probation detainers and shouldn't be. We wouldn't know how kids were being offered plea deals so that they can, go back into juvenile court when really they should just be in juvenile court. So we always need court watchers. That's not a lie. And sometimes you see some pretty entertaining judicial behavior, entertaining in the worst way. But on the rest of my list, when we talk about things that are most urgent, I agree with Manny and CACJ, but it's also the way we treat people with mental health and intellectual disabilities. So, my first thing on this list is to stop calling the cops on people who are having mental health episodes or people with behaviors you don't understand. Because what you may think is unusual for them might just be there every day and you don't understand it. They might be talking to themselves in the grocery store. Stop calling the cops. They're just having a conversation with them. You weren't invited. We need to start providing material resources to people who are unhoused, people who have needs, people who are affected by poverty, because a lot of, these quote unquote crimes that are being committed are crimes of necessity. And if we just give people what they need, we eliminate a lot of these problems. A community mediation. Sometimes we don't need to call the cops. Sometimes we just need to cuss each other out. So, just sit down, work it out, stop calling the cops for everything. We need to remove police from our schools. That shouldn't need an explanation, but these are kids. And your first interaction with the police sets the tone for the rest of your life sometimes. Honestly, all the time. And then, my last one is if you're in a grocery store and you see someone stealing, no, you didn't. They might just need what they're getting. And even if they don't, you still didn't see it. So just stop calling the cops for minor things, because you are potentially changing the course of someone's life forever. And you're gaining nothing by doing that.
So I'd say three things. Well, in addition to everything else.
Yeah, you just me too.
One is more inclusive spaces, right? So like when you go to a meeting or you find an opportunity to talk, I always like to look around and see who's not there and why. Oftentimes it's not intentional that people are being excluded, but for example, like at a county council hearing, when I asked for Spanish interpretation, that's a pretty common language. They said, no one has ever asked us this question, which is absurd. And they balked, they seemed angry, the administrator. And maybe it's because this space isn't even inclusive enough for someone to be able to even ask for interpretation. obviously, it's not just language, it's time of day that meetings are held, whether childcare is provided. So just making more inclusive spaces for other voices to be, or all voices to be heard is really important. Secondly, I'm going to plug a campaign that Casa San Jose has, which is for driver's licenses in Pennsylvania for immigrants. A lot of times our community members, their first interaction with police involves going to jail and then sometimes immigration detention just because they don't have access to a driver's license just because of their immigration status. So if anyone wants to get involved in that campaign, we also have a campaign for municipal IDs. So either of those campaigns, feel free to come up to me and I'll connect you with those. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about budgets. I hate money in talking about that, but I think it's really important because there are cycles for local governments and you have local, county, state, and national, and making public comment and contacting your representatives to tell them what you want in the budget and what you don't want in the budget. So maybe you don't want as much money to go to police. Maybe you want more money to go to social workers. Maybe you want more money to go to interpretation. Interpretation is extremely difficult to do. It's exhausting. If you have 2 hours of an event, you need to have 2 interpreters. That's how exhausting interpretation is. So we need to pay our interpreters well, and that needs to be baked into budgets. If you don't have money for interpreters, then when someone asks for an interpreter, they're going to say, oh, we don't have money to pay them, right? So let's start asking for money for interpretation now so that our spaces can be more inclusive. And then also just when talking about budgets, police union contracts, they have different cycles from the budget cycles, but let's start getting input on the contract between the police department and the unions, because that really affects what the police chief is able to do or is not able to do based on the contract. So let's start getting involved in that process.
Thank you, Laura, for your I'm messing with her because she had like 5. Okay, so my number one thing probably normally wouldn't be my number one thing, but we weren't 12 days away from the election. It wouldn't be my number one thing, but my number one thing is to vote on November 7th because the people who are in power making these decisions need to change. So we need a new district attorney and we need a new county executive. So that is my number one immediate action for every last one of you in this room. Because we've launched this campaign against ACJ in January, and we've been trying to get policy changes. We've been packing the jail oversight board every Thursday. And until we have a new county executive, we're not really going to be able to make the impact that we need to make, right? People are dying in front of everybody's faces. It doesn't take a rocket science to tell you that there's something wrong here. And so it's really about the people who are in positions of power to make these decisions at the end of the day. Bethany is doing all she can do, but she's doing all she can do. And so it's up to us to make sure that we put somebody in office that she can work with, that she can talk to, that will hear her to make these changes. And so that's my number one thing. Number two would be in 2024, the legislation for traffic stops was going to come back up. I know you probably, and if you didn't, it was in the news. Traffic stop legislation passed. It didn't have enough teeth in our opinion. We did a survey of the community to find out, so we could get our own data, the reasons that they are stopped by Pittsburgh police and specifically. And there were some things missing that came up, like tinted windows that wasn't in the legislation that people were stopped for. We recently had an individual who was stopped in East Liberty. We were sent a video. This young man was stopped by the police because of his tinted windows. He was asked to get out of his car. And then a dog, they called it a drug dog, to walk around his car as he sat on the sidewalk to sniff around his car, I guess, sniffing for drugs. But there was no reason for that, right? There was absolutely no suspicion. They didn't smell anything. They humiliated him by having him sit on the curb for anybody riding past to see. And they're just using these excuses to harass people, right? And so, and that's what they do. But they always cite safety as an issue for everything. And long story short, the officer's name is Macesso, who did that in Zone 5. And we got like 6 complaints on him. He's actually going through disciplinary going through discipline right now, but the issue is arbitration always, which is another topic, and that's on the state level. But traffic stops are coming back up next year, and we really need to get this passed. Manny brought this up, I think, when in his first question, right? Is that people are being unnecessarily stopped for traffic stops and going to jail from those traffic stops. Leon Ford was paralyzed from a traffic stop, right? And so we see that these traffic stops are not necessary and they do not pose a threat to public safety. Someone having a tail light out, I mean, how many times are you driving and you're looking behind your car? Never, right? So if someone having a tail light out, that's not a reason to stop somebody. And so these things are coming up and we need people to come to council, right? Because council needs to hear you, because law enforcement is going to make sure their people are in the room. They're going to pack it, right? And so we need people to come in who are like-minded to speak to why these things need changed. The other thing is the youth downtown. You know, the news has been painting youth and people experiencing homelessness as a problem for downtown Pittsburgh. They are the worst things ever in life. We have 2,100 youth that come through downtown every day. There are 4 schools down here, but also there are a ton of other schools that are bused down here because it is the connecting point for them to get back to their neighborhoods. And so we have children being charged with loitering, getting summary offenses, getting kicked out of businesses because they need Wi-Fi in a bathroom. We have not one single public bathroom downtown Pittsburgh. And so when they need to go to the bathroom, they're going into businesses or stores, and because they're not buying anything, they're being charged with loitering and getting kicked out of the businesses. So we're opening a youth engagement center down here, and it would be great to have people come help out and volunteer. We'll be going out in the streets every day between 2 and 4, because that's what time the buses get down here, just directing youth back, to the center where we are. And we'll also be having, because the county, we're working with county DHS, we'll also be having resources for people who are experiencing homelessness to pass out things to them as well. But there are a lot of people who do come down here, just since I've been down here, that you see coming down here. PSL, Party, Socialism, and Liberation comes down here every week. And, our Feed Me Youth Lorenzo was doing it every week for a while before the shelter closed down. And so I think that's always needed down here to really be able to be boots on the ground and help. And the last thing I'm going to say is, in order for us to change the culture of public safety in this county, it's going to take all of us to continuously be a voice. Because coming up in 2024, when all the Trumpers want to be coming out and all this hard on crime, we see DA Apollo's videos, his commercials, right? When all this hard on crime messaging is going to be coming out to counter what this movement is, right? And so we need more voices when it comes to that movement. And so when those calls come out, please don't ignore them. Please show up. Please get people's contact information. Get on people's contact list so you can get the emails to know where to go and when. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I think we've heard some great recommendations. Show up, volunteer, donate. I will say the Core Watch, you can even get trained, I believe, for free. So please show up to these things, be present. We need people on the ground sometimes. Physically being present is important. So I really appreciate everybody's highlights. I will open it up to everybody else here for informal questions.
Questions, raise your hand.
Thanks so much. So I work with lots of you, so I'm really happy to be here. I'm asking about, as members of the university, what can we do, right? So we're a very small center at Pitt, Casa, and we have Emmeline and SE, and in various meetings. And we now have a channel to Honors College. There's 3 Honors College students here that that we also take it to the jail oversight meeting and all these other meetings. But there is what is the best way for us to show up, right? So the students are in various programs. They have to write papers. They have to do analysis. Some of them are applying to more education later. And, we're showing up. And then one thing that we're trying to do is try to listen really closely to what sort of question that we can answer, so sort of provide consulting, collect data for you, or build things, or do research, right? So what is the best way for us to show up and use the students' education to, be there for the movement? And in a way that doesn't tax so much on you guys that are already spending like hundreds of hours on this.
Can I just start? Because I teach at Pitt, but I'm also a community organizer. And one of the things that it's frustrating in working with students is that they don't consistently show up or do what they say because there's exams and there's school and all those pressures. And when you're working with community allies, people count on you to show up. And if they take time to help explain their work, like these folks here, they came out, it's an evening, you got lots of other things you'd rather do, but they came to help us understand the work and what's needed. So that takes time. And so if you take time from organizers, make sure you're responsible about how you use that time. And all of us, we're just doing this. I'm a volunteer. I work like 2 jobs and I do the human rights work because I love it, because it's necessary. And I don't have money for it or whatever, but I can do it. I use whatever time I can. And I think all of us in the community need to think about our role as citizens. We have to, if we want to hold politicians accountable, we have to be active in our communities and understand how government works and understand what our rights are and how to hold people accountable. So students, when you do get involved, recognize that the people you work with are busy, really busy, and they know a lot. You are learning, and think about it as a learning opportunity that you need to be responsible to the other people that you're going to work with. So that would be, I think, my first piece of advice to folks going from campus. Be responsible to the community and be humble.
So just recognizing and acknowledging what you said and building on that a little bit. I co-founded an org called Jailbreak, which is kind of like the precursor to this org that I also co-founded, called Community Care Resistance in Pittsburgh. And it's basically a jail support organization. That is really the core org that tables outside of the jail. We also do a lot of houses work downtown. We were actually on Smithfield on Sunday, believe it or not. And the reason I bring up Jailbreak is because it was primarily made up of students, especially or particularly Pitt students. And one of them is in the room today. I don't know if I was showing one, but no. And they said something like very profound to me. They said that like a lot of people get recruited from other states to come to Pittsburgh, to come to some of these universities, and they kind of extract the education and then they take it back to wherever they came from. You know what I mean? So it's like, even if they are engaged for the 4 years that they may be here or however long, even if they are engaged in the community, eventually they take that experience, they take that education elsewhere. You know what I'm saying? They kind of abandon that community that they were part of. So a lot of jailbreakers I know, including this person, I'm shouting them out, this is Leah. Leah, next to Miracle. A lot of people choose to stay here because of the ties that they built in the community and because of the value of the work that they did when they were here. You know what I'm saying? And I will say, I agree with what you said, like be humble, you know what I'm saying? Understand it as a learning experience. But kind of like the way that I was taught is every experience that you're in is a learning experience. I was actually taught that everywhere you are is school. You know what I mean? So even the people who are coming to so-called learn from us, we can learn from you too. You know what I mean? Because your experience is different from mine. And to me, that's like what community is all about. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we're really trying to build with the work that we do. It's not really about, even though we call it like mutual aid, we don't really like the what do you call it, charity title. You know what I'm saying? It's not really about the transaction. You know what I mean? If anything, the transaction is just like the initial like entryway into, you know what I'm saying, like building community with that person. You know what I mean? So I will say a good way for you to show up as students. On Tuesday, again, I'll say, we're outside of the jail every week. The reason I keep saying that is because we're very consistent, right? We've been doing it every week for over a year. All right, so even though we are, very similar to Jailbreak wasn't as consistent as we are. I'm not dissing. I'm not dissing. I'm saying if you ever walk past the jail on a Tuesday between 5 and 8, you will see us there. That's what I'm saying. And that's a very easy way. That's a very low barrier, very low key, low pressure way to learn about what's actually happening and people who are directly impacted and to get involved, even if it is just with a few conversations. You know what I'm saying? Again, like I said, I think that y'all can learn from us, but we can also learn from you. And I'm interested in anybody who is a part of our community, even if it is on a temporary basis.
So is that Tuesdays? Yeah, 1,700?
1,600.
To 2,000, okay, 1,700 to 2,000, yes. So yeah, I'm gonna keep it short, because honestly, when it comes to students, my thing is, one, I take interns, and that's because I, again, with that time piece, I don't have a lot of time, but I do like to help people use their skills, and I do like to teach. So I do take interns, but you will be working, and you will be putting those skills to use. But for me right now, the most useful thing is court watch, because a lot of what we're doing is tracking data trends in the courts. Or if you can't commit to court watch because you have classes and stuff like that, we always need people helping us with the dockets. Like a lot of these trends are coming directly from dockets. So we're mixing what we're seeing with our own eyes versus what we're seeing in the dockets. Because one thing I'll tell you, if you read somebody's charges on a docket, they look crazy. If you just read what they're charged with, they will have you believing that this person knocked over a 7-Eleven, flipped a car, and yeeted a baby across the sidewalk. And really, it's just retail theft. So we also need to compare those as well and how judges are treating them. So we still need the in-person element, but we also need people to actually take a look at the dockets and look for those disparities, disproportionalities. And lastly, I can't talk enough about the Jail Oversight Board meeting. I always tell people, like, one, your presence helps. Even if you're not someone who's a public speaker or ready to public speak, one of two things. You're going to get mad enough to want to talk. Or two, you're going to be like, Tanisha, what do I say? And I'm like, let me type up something real quick. So either way, I got you. But we need people there because you're not just speaking up for people in the county jail. A lot of times with those jail oversight boards, you have parents of people who are incarcerated. You have people who've lost people in that jail. And sometimes it's really lonely when you think you're the only person who cares about your loved one. So they need you there too. So if you reach out to me before a jail oversight board meeting, I promise you, I will coordinate with you getting there. I will help you if you're like stuck on something to say. I will brief you on issues that are going on. I will make time. So that's what I got.
For me, it's a lot about data. I think a lot of the folks that work in our line of work, especially social workers, at least I'm really bad at data, and I think university students are pretty good at that. So I think helping us, like, looking at what is missing, like when we look at a report, like what are we not seeing, or why don't we agree with this report? And then I think that's where university students can step in and help us out to say, all right, well, what data do you have and how do you present it? How do you analyze that data? Specifically for Casa San Jose, there is a language requirement because a lot of our data is in Spanish. So if you'd like to work with us, that's just, it's hard to work with us to provide that type of support if you don't speak Spanish. So my other recommendation is learn a language. A lot of people say like, I meant to do that. It's never too late to learn a language. I say go for it. I know Tanisha's learning Spanish.
I have a Duolingo.
Yes.
Like a year.
So I think it's never too late to do that, and I really want to encourage everyone to do that. But yeah, data, if you do speak Spanish or know someone that speaks Spanish that wants to help out, please send them my way.
I always say there is room in the movement for everybody. So no matter what you do, there's somewhere you can fit in. But right now, I would say, and we love working with students. We work with state and student urban data, studs, from CMU. They helped us create a map of Allegheny County and all of the police departments within Allegheny County. That's still online that you can find them. But I would say our Law and Public Policy Committee right now is really about to dig into, we decriminalized marijuana a few years ago. And they actually haven't been doing, well, not every officer has been doing what they're supposed to be doing with this decrim law. And so right now we're digging into it because the current mayor is very interested in making sure that people are not arrested for marijuana possession. And so what they're doing is looking at, since the time that we passed this legislation, you know, how many people were arrested. And at the time that we did it, the reason that we did it is because Black youth were #1 for marijuana possession arrests, right? Not Black people, but Black youth, right? So we're talking about them targeting youth as a very real thing. And it's like for smoking a joint in a park, right? They're just want to go arrest people. And so what the law stated is that instead of arresting folks, they would get a $25 fine and be let go. Even though we don't like fines, it was better than going to jail. And so we're going to dig into, you know, the data around what happened since then, the arrest trends, and where we're at today. And being able to present that to the mayor's office because they're asking for it. And so there's a group of folks who trying to, I think it's working with those folks to, you know, to get that done. The other thing I wanted to mention was the public safety budget real fast, because I forgot to talk about that earlier. One of the things you could focus on. Right now, they're trying to take the money in the public safety budget that is directed towards community out, right? So they're trying to decrease the funding that right now is in the public safety budget that goes to community. And we're trying to increase that, right? And so we are going to need everybody to make sure that they know that, and what they always say is the community wants. The community wants more police. The community wants this. And it's like, which community are you talking about? And which community are you talking to? And the best way to refute those type of tactics and those type of arguments is to have people in their face saying the opposite on live recorded camera, right? And so, yeah, Law and Public Policy Committee, helping with the street teams downtown, I think is a very big thing. And also we take intake calls. And for some reason, our calls are increasing right now. And so what that is when we take complaints from the community, so people call a hotline and they'll say this is what happened to them. Right now, we're working on a situation, I don't know if anybody heard this, which is why I say we need a new district attorney. A young man by the name of Brandi Thomas was murdered over in Shelley Park was killed by a young man over in Shelley Park by the name of Luca Antonucci, right? Brandi Thomas, 17 years old. His mom calls us because nothing happened. Nobody was arrested. Nothing happened, and she was wondering what happened. Luca, of course, is white. Brandon is Black. Our district attorney decided to say that it was justified. There are a ton of witnesses there, youth that were around who say the opposite. So these are the type of cases that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So everything's not high profile. This is what we work on every day. And this is why I say that we have to stay involved, because the stuff is systemic, right? This is the same district attorney who has a commercial that acts like he cares about crime so much. But all you see is young Black boys with guns, as if those are the only crimes that are out here. And so as you know, students, I think, you know, being involved at every level and making sure you're informed, one, is important, but two, just getting in where you fit in. What is your passion, right? What do you love to do, right? Because I think the worst thing as a student is being placed somewhere doing data entry, right? This is my internship. This is, you know, I got to input all this information in the computer all day. You're right, it's not passionate. And what our organization does impacts everyday life right now. And so it's the way I look at it as having a practicum, you know, to spend the time where you can make a difference while you're in school and not have to wait till you're graduating and get a title.
Sorry, I'll give the mic back. Hi, everyone, I'm Holly. I used to work at Pitt, and I want to say two things really quickly. There used to be an undergraduate club called Pitt Prison Outreach, and I was the advisor for a couple of years, and Leo was part of it too. I One thing you can do is grow your numbers by organizing yourselves on campus so that it's not just the three of you or how many showed up today, but it's even more people so that everyone can get placed with all these wonderful organizations. Also, there's money in the Honors College for community-based research, and I can help you navigate that because I used to run that program. So hit me up afterwards to like finagle Pitt stuff.
Hi. I have a question for each of you. If you could tell me whether your goal is abolition or reform, what do you see currently as the biggest barrier towards reaching the goal?
So my goal is abolition. I do not believe in reform, and I actually see reform as a barrier to abolition because a lot of people get like complicit or they get satisfied with like minor improvements. You know what I mean? Like instead of saying, well, I could have been in the jail and I went house arrest, so that's good enough. You know what I mean? Well, no, actually, you know, you should be considered innocent before you're punished on any level. You know what I mean? So like what I said earlier, I'll reiterate, I do believe the system is working the way it was intended to. You know what I'm saying? It's rooted in white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? And white supremacy, you know, automatically implies black inferiority. You know what I mean? So that's why you have 67% of the people in the ACJ are black, even though we're 13% of the county. You know what I mean? That's by design. You know what I'm saying? You know, we mentioned it earlier. Of course, over police, blah, blah. That is the way that the system is built. You know what I mean? You cannot reform a system that was built to be oppressive. You know what I mean? You have to destroy it and replace it with something else. And this is the last thing I'll say, right? The system that we have, we've had it for so long that we think it's the only system that ever existed. You know what I mean? We think that's the only system that ever will exist. It's based on punishment. It's not based on rehabilitation. It's not based on helping, you know what I'm saying, the community or helping, you know what I'm saying, to reform. It's a punitive justice system. There are other systems that exist, that existed even before this one that we know now. There are restorative justice systems. There are transformative justice systems. You know what I mean? And matter of fact, something I should have said earlier, inform yourselves, and you know, not to suggest that you don't know about this, but learn a little bit about abolition. You know what I mean? Learn a little bit about why our criminal legal system is the way that it is, how it got started. You know what I'm saying? If you haven't heard of the new Jim Crow, you know what I mean? If you haven't heard of slavery by another name, read a couple of these books. You know what I mean? There are a lot of people who write very beautifully about these things. Abolition, feminism now. You know what I'm saying? There's another book which is probably one of the best books I've read in a while called Casa. There's a lot of what we consider to be racism or like things based on race is the more accurate word is caste. You know what I mean? So anyways, to circle back, I am an abolitionist. I do not believe we can reform the system, and I do see these reforms or people who believe in reform as a barrier to abolition because some people get satisfied with like minor improvements. You know what I mean? Well, it's better than it was, but it's still not good. It's still not good.
So my goal is abolition. The only time I engage in reform is when we have to harm reduction, like in the jail. Like, okay, you are currently killing people, we still have a jail, you still need to change your mental health policies. But my biggest barrier to abolition is white supremacy, just flat out, because these systems exist because of white supremacy. These systems are built to continue and perpetuate white supremacy. There's not a part of the prison or police systems that is not directly linked to white supremacy. And we uphold this by continuing to like vote for things that allow them to exist. So yeah, we can't do that anymore. It's not helping anybody. I don't believe the police could ever be reformed because I also don't believe they should exist. I don't believe a jail could be reformed because I don't think a jail could exist. I hate when we do things like, you know, coffee with a cop. Because we're not humanizing cops around here because their goal is to dehumanize us. I don't sit down at tables to have, like peace talks with like police officers. I don't, buddy it up with CEOs to try to find a middle ground because there's not a middle ground you can have me meet that involves giving you permission to take away my freedom and humanity. So for me, anytime I'm talking to someone in that situation, it's like, these are the things you're doing, you have to stop. So for me, my freedom is non-negotiable, even though it's been taken from me before.
Abolition, which for me also includes the immigration system. So open borders is a part of abolition for me, and no detention of anyone for any reason, including immigration status, but for any reason. Yeah, white supremacy.
I love this question, always. And so my shero, who is Harriet Tubman, who my car is named after, because she's a Honda, my daughter says my name's ugly. But anyway, say that H stands for Harriet, and she's taking me to freedom. But she's really my shero because she believed that she was guided by God her entire way, and that she was selfless and went back and got people, even though she could have been free herself. And I think about that, like making it out of poverty. A lot of people do that, make it out of poverty, keep on going with their life, and forget about the people who are still living in it. And we have to go back and help folks. But I learned that I'm an abolitionist through the work that I do and the people that I work with. And I struggled with that for so long because I don't feel like the work that we're doing is abolishing. I feel like the work that we're doing is we're on a path to abolishing, right? Like abolishing jails, it would be great if the Allegheny County jails didn't exist. But how much power do we have to do that? I think there's things that you have to do to get to that point because we can't just go blow it up. I mean, we could, but we can't just go blow it up, right? So how do we abolish the prison system? It's going to be through certain, what I call all reforms, if it's not actually abolishing something. And so it was so funny when Manny said he sees reform as the barrier to abolition, because I see reform as a path to abolition, because I believe that everything we're doing is really reform. Until we see it not exist anymore, and we say how we abolished it. And so, and I think the biggest barrier is the lack of understanding of what abolitionist is, because for a long time, I didn't understand what it was. And I think people see it, like when you say abolish the police, they think, okay, tomorrow there's no police and there's going to be chaos. What are we going to do? And that's like the most extreme idea people always say when they're talking about abolition. And if we just abolish everything tomorrow, what's going to happen? There's going to be chaos. And so I think that is like the biggest barrier to it being actualized, is this misunderstanding of what it is.
Can you tell us what it is? Can you speak to that?
Well, thank you, y'all. Was it my question? I didn't think he was asking me directly.
I was.
Oh, okay, great.
Anyone can answer. But I was feeling the same way about the difference between reformists and abolitionists. But I can understand why there might be some feelings of obstruction between those two, or clash between those two groups. What does abolitionist mean to you?
It means the non-existent of this system right now, the way that it is designed. It means, it means prisons to me not existing, where people are not getting locked up for those things. It means, the construct and the structure of, the criminal legal system, policing not existing. And so when I think of abolition, I think of these things not being here, and us having a new way of the way that we address these things. We have a different way that we address these things, opposed to the mechanisms that the system has created, what ends up, just destroying everybody's life. And so for a prime example, it's, Manny brought up restorative justice, transformative justice, and restorative practices, right? And talked about how we think that the current system is the only way to address certain things, right? But there are different ways to address these situations, and that's what people always say. So what do you do instead of arresting someone when this happens? If we're going to get rid of police and we're going to get rid of jails, if somebody comes in my home and robs my house, what do you do? And so it's hard for people to grasp, but it's easy to have conversations about that. I've seen it happen. We do it every day in community, but for people to adopt that as a system, people just don't see how that can be. But it is definitely possible. It's the same thing that people talk about when you have students in school. There's a fight. Instead of arresting them or suspending them, how about taking them into a room and talking about what happened, what harm was done, and how that can be repaired. So that's how I see abolition.
One thing I would add is because we don't want to think just about what we're taking away, but what we're creating. And for me, that's community. And especially, I think, talking about mental health situations where people are a harm to themselves, potentially into the community. And so creating a system from the get-go of how do we support our folks that are having different mental health difficulties in situations. Another situation that comes up in my mind when I think of abolition is domestic violence. Because I'm on call 24/7 to respond to police and ICE detentions, and a lot of the incidences are domestic violence. And seeing what our community members go through, it's really hard sometimes for me to really stay committed to abolition when I see what is happening with domestic violence. But if we invest in community, I think that would drastically reduce situations of domestic violence, right? Open conversations with toddlers about how do you treat people of a different gender and stuff like that. And so if we invest in community, the need to separate people and treat them differently shouldn't exist.
I'm gonna skip this one because I really don't want to answer it. Because I'm still in the growth phase of my journey. And some of my answers is, I think the best way for me to put it is community knows how to heal itself. And the community can handle conflict resolution in ways that don't involve carceral systems. But I also do believe and agree with some of the points made here that it involves, replacing what we have now with better. And we have to be creative enough to get there. We have to think outside of the confines of what we've been given and subjected to. So if we think within the confines of oppression and build our systems based on what oppressive systems already exist, we're not going to have anything better. But yeah, that's one of the ways I would approach it.
That was still on. Manny, bring it down.
What?
That was still on. You want the mic? You want the mic here? No? Okay. Thank you.
All right, so abolish means to formally put it into a system, a practice, or an institution. Right? Yeah, cool. But of course, like a lot of us learned about abolitionists in the context of slavery. Right? People like Harriet Tubman, or people like one of my heroes, Frederick Douglass, who were abolitionists in the context of slavery. Right? But what we actually got right after slavery was sharecropping and mass incarceration, which some people say is an extension of slavery. You know what I mean? So even though they were technically abolitionists, what they got was a reform. And a lot of people accepted. You know what I mean? A lot of people accepted the sharecropping and the Jim Crow, and of course, there are people who didn't accept it, which is why it doesn't exist the way that, I'm saying, we have it today. Today, well, the form that it exists in is mass incarceration. There's a book, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, Slavery by Another Name. It talks all about mass incarceration. Why? Because whenever I'm here right now, my name is Manny, or my last name is Nasir. If I go upstate, my name may be HQ 62 Tip. You know what I'm saying? And I'm legally considered state property. You know what I mean? And I'm working for maybe pennies, or I'm working for nothing in an ACJ. What is that if not slavery? That's why I say I'm against reform, because I think a lot of us confuse, abolition with reform, or we think that some of these progresses or some of these steps that we make is abolition, when it's really not. It's a different form of that same oppression. And like I said, the root of it is white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? And that's why, you know, most of the cops in Pittsburgh police are white. Most of the lawyers, most of the judges are white. I meant to actually say about the AOC Court Watch program. It's extremely important because most of these judges think that they have unlimited power and they abuse their power. A lot of times they do whatever they want to do because most people are not paying attention to what's happening and most people don't care. They don't have any accountability. So showing up and watching them, it's a way to hold them accountable. Most of the judges are white. You know what I'm saying? There's a reason for that. You know what I mean? It's not only white people are interested in being, you know, in these professions. You know what I'm saying? And like I said before, and I'm going to reiterate it because it's extremely important, the severity and the disparity. Right? We are 13% of the county, 67% of the county jail. You know what I mean? And what is that? If not another form of, you know what I'm saying, slavery, which is rooted in white supremacy. So that's why I don't really believe you can reform something that has you know, negative or rotten roots to the core. I do think it has to be destroyed and replaced with something else.
Yes, I'm going to pass it to Jackie.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap it up. I want to thank our panelists, and I think this was a really interesting last question because he left us with the hard work ahead of system change. And that's what building a human rights city is about. That's what abolition is about. We can't just change one small thing and think that it will be better. If we want a different world, we have to start figuring out what that looks like and then think about how we get there. And that's really what the Human Rights City Project is. It's a project. We have to be committed to rebuilding our city, redesigning our city in new ways, restructuring relationships in some fundamental ways. And what we wanted to leave you with tonight is that these reports that we're lifting up are tools that we can use to help amplify this message and expand this work and reach some new people. But it's going to take a lot of us to do that. I think another key point in the reports that I think is really interesting when we do human rights work and really engage the global conversation around rights, the United States is way out of step with the rest of the world on a lot of things, especially our law enforcement and legal system. And people in, you know, everyday folks in the US don't know that. They think that the US is okay with human rights. We don't need human rights at home. Human rights are problems out in other parts of the world, right? That's what the mainstream conversation is. So we need to change that. And what was really fascinating in listening to this panel is, you know what, the people whose rights are being neglected and abused, those people know what the solutions are. The problem is that their rights are being violated and their voices are not being heard. So what we all need to do is be about amplifying those voices, and this report from the UN does amplify those voices. It gives us another tool to help amplify the voices of the people that are being most harmed by the US failure to live up to the standards of human rights that it calls on other countries to follow. So, so I hope you'll sign up in the back. We'll keep you posted on things that you can do. And I think if you have conversations with other people, just share this report, tell them what you learned. That's part of the work. Show up at the jail oversight board and start quoting paragraphs that you heard about tonight. Pick your favorite paragraph and go throw it at them and then give them a copy of the report to read because they need it. We're going to send it to them. But if they keep hearing about it from other people, then they might actually read it. So think about creative ways that you can change the script, change the story, change how people are thinking, because that's what system change is. And before I close everything out, Thea Young has an announcement about a program. The Racial Justice Summit, many of you may know, is a great event we do every year here in Pittsburgh that's really part of this work of changing that conversation. So things are gearing up for 2024.
Thank you. So I work with the Black Market Union. will be the 26th Annual Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit that we are sponsoring. It will be January 19th and 20th, Friday evening and Saturday morning at the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. The seminary and the YWCA Greater Pittsburgh are our partners this year. The theme is from othering to bridging, reconnecting, and rest as resistance. We're in the process of planning the summit. We're meeting online Mondays at 7 p.m. If people are interested in getting more information or helping plan, please sign, provide more information on this form. Thank you.
What date it is?
Pardon me?
20th of January.
The January 19th and 20th. That's Friday evening and Saturday morning. And we're hoping to have it in person and online.
Great. Thanks once again to all the panelists, and hope to see you all in our next gathering.